All right. So, let's see here. Hey, Mike. How's it going? Can you hear me? Can you hear me now? Hey, Tommy. How's it going? Okay, you hear me. Okay, good. Yeah, that was pretty messed up. I do not use Zoom for anything. Um, so, yeah, I don't know how it works. Supposedly, the link was supposed to work twice, but it didn't. So, there you go. Matthew, how's it going? How's it going? Right on. Today is wet blending. And give me just a second. I'm going to get rid of my phone so that we don't have problems like I did yesterday. I'll be right back. All right. I don't know why I have my headphones on, but I'm going to have them on. Zoom skills are overrated. Yeah, exactly. All right. I'll tell you what. I am going to... Oh, shoot. How can you see... Okay, I am going to put the link in here. Can you guys just post that link in other places? Or maybe even on the shadow, the brimstone thing. Oh, great. Now my girlfriend's calling me. Goodness. This is really messed up. Decline. Sorry. So long. All right. Okay. So, we're still going, right? I just closed out of a thing. Goodness me. Anyways, here we go. Woot woot. All right. So today is wet blending, and I got my coffee with me because it's super early in the morning. I don't know what I was thinking, but I think it's good for those people across the pond. So we are good to go. First thing, so wet blending is super awesome. It's the mythical beast that everyone talks about, but nobody knows how to do properly. And I spent 7 years of my life trying to figure out how to do it. And I figured some things out. One, it's not perfect. If you're thinking that you're going to wet blend, and wet blending is basically putting two colors on the model, blending them together, and you're good to go. Sounds really easy, and then it's not when you try it. So, but a lot of my students think that they should have like a perfect blend, and they get really frustrated when it isn't. It's not going to be that way. Sometimes it is. Sometimes you get lucky, and it's like super good. But most of the time, it's going to take a little bit of work on your part. But to get it like 70, 80% of the way there is really awesome. And there are different types of wet blending to get different results on models. So that's another cool thing. So having different ways of putting paint on a model is a good thing, whether it be layering or something like that. But we're not going to talk about layering or glazing today. We're going to talk about wet blending. So the first one is what I call meet in the middle. This is the first way I learned to wet blend. Before we get into that, let me talk a little bit about the stuff that we're going to be using today. So, switch over to this. And I will try to answer questions as best I can. I'm on my own again today. So it will be a little bit crazy, as they say. All right, so I've got my wet palette. If you notice, my water is filled up right to the edge of the sponge, but trying not to get over the edge of the sponge because I don't want my palette paper floating around. Sometimes that happens. It is what it is. The palette paper I use, this is Game Envy. The wet palette is Redgrass Games. The palette paper is Game Envy, and they create web palettes as well, which are great. I think all the web palettes are pretty much about the same. They all do their job. They keep your paint wet for longer. That's about what they're supposed to do. But the palette paper is different. A lot of the palette papers let a lot of moisture, a lot of water through them, and I don't really like that. I don't want to have I don't want to have water coming into my paint without my permission, really. So this paper is from Game Envy. It's a thicker version of their wet palette paper, and it works really well. It seems to keep the water out for most parts. The other thing that you can use, and the thing that I use quite often, is parchment paper. So just regular baking paper. Don't get the brown stuff. Get the white baking paper, and don't go to like your dollar store like I did and buy 10 rolls of cheapo baking paper, because it didn't work. It was super thin and it just ripped, and it kind of was bad. So get like the regular Reynolds baking paper. They come in like cookie sheet sizes and stuff and everything, so it's pretty cool. So I just cut it down. I cut it down smaller than my wet palette so that I can grab water from the outside edges. And you'll notice when you put it in, it starts rolling up. Like, well, let's watch this edge right here. Oops. It's starting to roll up. So I don't want it to roll onto itself, so I just put paint pots on each side. Give that about 5 minutes, and you won't need to, it will relax, and it will be perfect. So that being said, let me see if I can, yeah, right there, starting to work. So that paper is starting to go down, and we are good to go. All right. Put that back over here for our palette cam. So brushes, I've got some different brushes here. These are this is a hobby brush. It is just a hobby brush. It's synthetic, and I find that synthetic brushes are really good for base coating, and they're really good for wet blending. They seem to let the paint they put the paint on the model more evenly than your Klinsky sables. You may have noticed when you put a base coat on with a Klinsky sable, oftentimes it's a little bit blotchy, and I don't know why that is, but it's something to do with like the fact that this is actual animal fur and this is not. So these ones, the little tubes that make each one of the hairs is perfectly smooth, and on these ones, it's there's little barbs in it that kind of hold onto the paint. So for blending and stuff and doing detail work, these are great. And for base coats, these are great. Also, when you're doing base coats, usually you're painting a little bit quicker. And I find when your brush strokes are faster, it ruins your good brushes quicker. So it's good. These ones are like 50 cents online. So you can't beat them. And they have a pretty good tip on them. So those are the brushes. You don't want something super teeny tiny like this little detail brush. That's not going to do you any favors at all. We want to have bigger brushes. We're base coating. Probably nothing smaller than this size 1 or size 2 actually from Artist Opus. But you can see their size 2 is smaller than the size 1 from Raphael. So every single brush manufacturer has a different size brush. All right. Let's see here. We are going to be using the Brimstone colors, and you will notice when these come out of the can or out of the bottle. First off, a lot of times there's when they're brand new, there is like a liquid goo on top. It's the medium for the paint, but it's actually, as they call it, shipping medium. So you've got to get rid of that. You can't keep it. Some brands, when they separate, has that little clear amount on top, but there's just a little bit, and that you want to mix back in. But in Army Painter's case, you want to get rid of that. You want to get rid of all of it because it's way too much medium for the paint. And if you mix it in, which you can because it's medium, it will make your paint too thin. So in a case like this, I didn't know that for this particular bottle, but I think this purple is mixed in with a lot of that mixing media. So that being said, just make sure that your paint is the right consistency, and don't mix all that medium in if at all possible. If you already did it, you already did it. But for wet blending, we're going to need thicker paint, a little bit thicker paint, and that will be a good thing. Okay, so as far as the miniatures go, you could use black. I have one model prepped that's partially zenithally primed and partially just black, so we can take a look at what the paints look like just over black and what they look like over a zenithal prime. I recommend you do a zenithal prime, even if you only have a rattle can. Like when I'm priming miniatures, I'll use Rust-Oleum 2X. And you can spray black first, and then you grab some white, which I don't have a can of white here, but we'll just look at this like this. I'll pull that back a little bit. And you just spray from about 45 degrees up and about 12 inches away. And just spray. Probably wear some gloves because you're going to get it all over your hands. But spray all the way around. And you're going to want to do light little sprays, because otherwise it's not good. Okay, so we discussed that. The zenithal prime really does help, and it really gives you an idea of where, say, highlights and shadows should go. Because obviously, when things are just black like this, you can't really see anything. So you have to guess, which is fine if you want to do that. But I think the zenithal prime works great. You can see also how it looks on bases and stuff. And we're going to be practicing on a couple bases here just for the initial painting, just to show you how that works. And also, bases were the thing that I learned how to wet blend on. They're very forgiving, and if you mess up, nobody really yells at you because your blend on your base was a little bit messed up. So it's a great place to practice. So there we go. All right, so meet in the middle. This will be our first one. I'm going to start using just a base. I'm sure a lot of you have bases like this laying around your house, especially if you're putting your models on custom bases, like really cool custom bases like that, or the ones the frogs sell. Super awesome looking bases. And so you end up with a bunch of these left over. So these are great to practice wet blending on. And I'm going to tell you right now, your practice on this is going to look horrible. You know, it kind of is what it is. But at least it's a good place to practice. Okay, Tommy has a question. How much can a particular paint brand help or hinder your wet blending efforts, would you say? Like, do some paints dry slower, blend smoother in general? That's kind of a loaded question. So every paint brand has good paints and bad paints, like all of them, you know, like even your favorite brand, you're like, these are amazing. I love all these paints. And then you'll come across that one paint that you're just like, but I don't love that one. So I find that for wet blending, you just gotta do and remember what paints are good. So the paints that I look for are paints with a thicker consistency right out of the bottle. So Army Painter's kind of that way. A really good example that I can give is Reaper Miniatures. They have two bases. One base is thinner, and you can tell right out that, like when you pour it out of the bottle, it's thinner. And one base is thicker. The thicker base works way better for wet blending, and a thinner base tends to not. Now, can you use it? Yes, but it just doesn't work as good. So when I'm using like Reaper paints, or even here with the Army Painter, the Shadows of Brimstone Army Painters, I will start finding out real quick like which paints are good for wet blending and which paints really aren't. Usually browns are really good across the board. But sometimes they're really bad. They're just really see-through, and really see-through doesn't do me any favors. So unless I'm trying to do start a texture or something on leather or whatever, and blotchy is kind of good. So I will on purpose make something not as good as it should be. But we'll probably see here in a couple seconds the differences between paint and what it does to the paint itself. Now, a couple things to remember. Let's go back to our paint cam. A couple things to remember. You don't want to thin your paint. Like, I can't stress that more than anything else. Do not thin your paint. And that includes, if you notice, when you wash out your brush, let's say I wipe it off on a paper towel. Okay, I'm good to go. It's wiped off. I wiped it off. There's no water in it, right? Well, actually, there's a ton of water still in it. So when I'm doing wet blending, a lot of times I will actually crimp my brush, especially when I've washed it out in water. Otherwise, a lot of times I don't wash my brush out at all. I want those colors to kind of percolate on the brush and start doing the blending process, start the blending process for me. So let's go into, let me bring up the Zoom. Oops. What's wrong? Come on, Zoom. Help me out here. Question and answers. It disappeared on me. All right. Any other questions before I start? Like the yellows, all yellows are bad. Yes, all yellows are bad. I actually talked to one of my good friends is the person who made paints for Reaper. And I asked her name's Ann Forrester, and she's an awesome painter and everything, and a terrific paint maker. I asked her, I was like, listen, I will pay triple for a bottle of yellow that actually covers. Like I don't care. And she was like, that's not the problem. The problem is the pigment. Our yellows have as much pigment as you can put into the paint before the paint stops being paint. So yellow is just one of those colors that doesn't cover very well. I'll tell you though, it airbrushes fantastically. So if you haven't picked yourself up an airbrush, think about it. Like, you don't have to get the best airbrush out there. In fact, you shouldn't. Just get a cheapo airbrush to start with and get your feet wet. See if you like it. See if you don't. We have lots of videos on Miniature Monthly. We have classes on miniaturemonthly.com that you can take if you really wanted to. Really in-depth things showing how to use your airbrush and not be afraid of it and everything. And for colors like yellow and white, man, those are two of the hardest colors to paint, I think. And they're two of the easiest colors to airbrush. So it's just one of those things where, you kind of pick your battles. I choose to fight battles like putting lots of details on the model rather than trying to get yellow to get down on a good base coat. I just make it happen with the airbrush. But you can do it with wet blending too. And you'll see here, well, probably not with yellow, but you're going to see here in just a second the wet blending. So, all right. So I'm going to grab two colors. Oh, and which colors do I grab? Okay, I'm going to grab these two. I think these two are going to work pretty well for wet blending. This one I used yesterday a little bit, and it seemed a little bit thicker. And this one, I don't know what the consistency of it is, but it's one of my favorite colors. So let's shake it up a little bit and rock and roll. Oops. I'll move my question thing back to the other monitor. Okay, so we'll start way up here. So I'll tell you one thing about paint. Everyone knows, according to the internet, that you are supposed to thin your paint to the consistency of skim milk, right? And that's all fine and dandy, but you're going to end up putting a lot of coats on things. And I'm a firm believer that the more times my paintbrush touches the model, the more opportunities I have to mess it up. So I don't want to do that. So the paint right out of the bottle, right here, right now, is the best it will ever be. Okay? As soon as I start adding waters or any kind of additive, paint thinner from your local manufacturer, like glaze medium, any of those things, drying retarders, they all start cutting into the capabilities of that paint. So if you do skim milk, is probably 2/3 to half water to paint. Now I'm at half of this paint's capability, not only just with opacity and color, but also with its ability to stick to your model. So you always have paint rubbing off and stuff. Could be because you're thinning your paint way too much. So for wet blending, my goal is to have a coverage in like 1 coat or 1.5 coats, maybe 2 coats at the most, if possible. But I'm really lazy, so I like to do 1 coat and done. So if I start thinning this, it's not good. So how do I apply a really thick paint thinly? So usually what I do is I start grabbing my paint on the palette. And if I ever do add water, which you shouldn't for this meet in the middle technique, it just doesn't work, and it will. So what happens if you put water in your paint? When the 2 colors touch, they tend to spider. They tend to spread out, and I don't want that. I want the 2 colors to touch and just blend and stay right where they're at. So if I'm grabbing my paint on my palette right here, I kind of pull it out, and you'll notice, like when I do Twitch streams or whatever, or in my videos on Miniature Monthly, I'm always pulling my paint out like this, and it's not because I'm trying to get a perfect blend of color going out, because there's no blend at all, it's just one color. But what I'm trying to do is I'm grabbing paint on my brush, and then I'm pushing it down, flattening that brush out. You can see this brush is pretty flat like that. It's thick paint loaded very thinly into the brush. So in this case, maybe I'll do a tester right here. I'll just do it right on the edge of the base. If I grab a little bit more paint, because obviously if you're doing a big area of paint, you need a little bit more paint. So I'll lay it on there, and what I do is I just lay the brush really lightly, because this doesn't leave brush strokes. I can move the brush back and forth. And what I'm hoping is, I don't know if you can see the sheen on this paint, but it's already drying up here because there's a thin amount of paint. It's still wet back here because the thick amount of paint is where I deposited it at the start of the brush stroke. So you're manipulating your paintbrush to have thicker paint, more opaque back here, and thinner paint that's still pretty opaque, but maybe not perfectly opaque up here. So that's basically what we're trying to do. So let me grab a piece of paper here. All right. So our goal, let's say this is our base or the model's surface right there, okay? So my brush strokes are going to start on one side and end in the middle of about where I want my blend to be. And I'll show you in a couple minutes how you can manipulate even that. But let's say we want our blend to be right there, okay? Right dead center. So I'm starting my one color this way, and my one color is also going to be starting this way. So I'm going to pick 2 colors. Now I want colors that are really far apart as far as tone goes. So this one's much darker, this one's much brighter. I'm going to get a better effect out of these if these 2 colors are far apart. Now, for instance, if we took these 2 colors, these would be horrible colors to wet blend, because this color is a little bit darker and this color is a little bit lighter, but not much. And I guarantee you when you wet blend those 2 together, it'll look like the same color across. So that's not going to do you any favors. So when you're layering, you want to do something like this, because you try not to leave marks. You're trying not to leave brush strokes. But in this case, you don't want to do those 2 colors next to each other. Same with like these. This brown and this brown are probably too close. I mean, they may work, but they're probably too close to be using together. You want to have boom, boom. That's some contrast, and you'll get more out of your wet blend that way. So that being said, I always start my brush stroke as far away from me as possible, and I pull my brush back towards my body. Every time I teach this, I see people pulling their brush this way, or they pull back, that like they're not pulling back towards their body, and they're also doing brush strokes like this, because that's how we paint, right? Everybody does these little bitty brush strokes. You don't want to do that. You want to lay your paintbrush down on the model, and you want to move it around and get that blend going. One part of that is when you put your brush down at first, it's a very light touch, and as you start moving back, you start pushing harder with your brush. You see my brush is pushing down onto the paper. You're pushing harder. One thing this does is it squeezes that paint into a thinner amount, okay? In the blending section, it's starting to get the paint thinner and thinner. The other thing that I'm wanting to try to do is run out of paint. So let's see if I can do this on paper. It might not work. So I put the brush down like this. I'm going back and forth. And then you see as I move the brush, it's not smooth, but you see that I'm running out of paint on the brush. There's just not as much paint. This is what I want. So I want thicker paint right here where I start the brush stroke, and thinner paint right here where I end the brush stroke, okay? So drop that in, start here. Now, what does my brush stroke look like? Usually I just go back and forth like this. Sometimes I make little circles. Sometimes I do like little sort of side to side. Sometimes I go fast. Sometimes I go really slow when I'm doing this blend, okay? I kind of cycle through all those different options when I lay the paint down. And basically that just helps me get a more even coat, I guess, than if I don't do that. So, and that's where the different properties of the paint come in, and the different colors within a line or within a range. You need to kind of cycle through your different ways of applying the paint. So as my paint gets over to here, I have barely any paint left. I take the model, instead of me turning my brush around and trying to paint the other way, I take the model and I just turn the model around, okay? This is the easiest way to do it. So if I'm painting the top of this guy and I've painted the top of him, I need to paint the other side now. I just flip the model around and I'm still painting back towards my body, okay? So on this side, I don't clean my brush off. I just grab the other color. And this is where you go, okay, well, which color do you do, the lighter color or the darker color? It kind of doesn't matter. Only if it starts messing up do you change it around. So maybe sometimes one color overtakes the other color. So let's say an equal amount of this tentacle blue and an equal amount of the Yambushi blue. Maybe the tentacle blue goes too far into the Yambushi blue. So to fix that, I'd put less tentacle blue down and more Yambushi blue down. So anyways, put this in there like that. You can see right now that the paint inside my brush is actually facilitating a blend already. So that might be a good thing. It might be a bad thing. Probably in this case, it's not the greatest thing. So maybe in this case, I would take the Yambushi blue, do it first, and then do the tentacle blue second. So that being said, I'm going to show it to you on this. So again, this will be the hardest way to practice, but I always like practicing the hardest way because it makes when you get onto a model much easier. And believe me, once you get onto a model, it's not the easiest thing. So I'm going to grab some of this blue, load my brush up, sort of flatten it out, and then I just grab a little bit on my brush. So how much you grab on the brush, you can kind of see there's a little dollop of paint there. How much you grab on the brush depends on how big the place is where you need to do. Obviously, if you're painting like a face on well, this is a bad example, but you're painting a face on a model, I need to paint from the cheek down to the mouth, and I want to go from bright color to darker color. You don't need very much paint. So how do you tell if you have too much paint? Well, part of that comes from practicing and realizing, oh man, I have too much paint. But the other way, sometimes I'll just set the paint down and I start moving it back and forth. Okay, here, I know that I don't even have enough paint, but I'm just going to move this out like that and start with my other color. Now you got to work quick, because if you don't, if the paint dries in the middle, you ain't wet blending. So that's my blend from a very dark color to a very light color. Now, you might say, okay, it kind of abruptly ends there. So I'll wipe my brush out, crimp it off. I'm going to grab a little bit more of this blue, and I can move it into my darker color. Like that. That's a little bit better blend. Let's say I want it to be more blue. I'm going to grab more paint on my brush. And you got to do this all while it's still wet. But I can start moving that lighter blue deeper into the tentacle blue. So I'm just sort of moving it this way. I do have thicker paint on this side, but that will dry. It should dry perfectly smooth, but if you're worried, you can always take your brush and just kind of fan it away on that side. But we've got a blend there. Let's see what it looks like on a model, okay? So when I'm painting a model, it's very hard to, like, this is a really good example actually. It's really hard to paint from up here all the way to down here, blending, because obviously the paint I put on the top here is going to be dry by the time I get back up to do a wet blend. So I cut it up into sections, and I'll show you how that works. So we'll grab some of our blue, and we'll just start up here, and we'll go to right about here. So here to there. So I'm just going to lay this on. See how nice that is? And also very, very opaque. And move it down the side. I just kind of wiped my brush off. I'll grab some of the dark color. And you got to work quick. Maybe the first few times you do this, you're not going to be fast enough, and the first color is going to dry, and you won't have any blend at all. But if you just keep at it, you get that blend. Okay, so blend's not completely perfect. I have a couple options for that. Either I come back and I do the exact same blend again. And I find that the second time around, it usually cleans up pretty much any problems that I had, any blotchiness or whatever. Otherwise, what I can do is let it dry and just paint over it again later. You have to be careful though, because the more paint you start getting loaded onto your model, I'll show you right here. If I do... This is how I used to wet blend. I would go, all right, we put a strip of super thick paint right here, and then a strip of super thick paint right next to it. And then we try to blend in between those two. You see how my paint is just, there's so much paint, it's not really blending. It's just moving the colors around. They're kind of swirling around each other. And you can sit here and continue to do brush strokes. The problem is I've got I don't have as much contrast as I had over here. It's kind of just all blah. It's too blended in. Or in some cases you have so much paint it never blends in, and you just have a jumbled mess. I've seen people do that too. So you want to make sure that where your paints are blending, your paint is as thin as possible but still wet. So okay. So we've got that first layer on. I'm going to show you on the second layer. We'll go over here. And let's say I grabbed way too much paint. So I'm like, all right, let's go. And this is going to happen. It happens to me all the time. And it will happen to you, and you won't really know that it's happening until you realize you have a really bad blend or whatever, and you need to fix that. But what I do to fix that is, so I'll start putting my paint down, and I'm like, wow, I have way too much paint. So I just wipe it off real quick on a paper towel and continue on. Oops. I wiped too much off. Sometimes it just doesn't do what you want it to do. Okay, so also I'm going up into the original base coat, which is perfect because this is the exact same color, so it doesn't matter. I'll do this, move our darker color into the lighter color, and you see up here I'm just kind of gently sort of doing little circular motions and kind of massaging that paint into work. Now, it kind of got messed up there in the front. You can add a little bit of paint while it's all still wet, and the more you do this, the better you get at it. So I think that actually fixed that perfectly. Cool. But you don't want to add too much. And you'll start knowing just over time how much paint you can, like I know just by the look of the paint on the model, if I can put more paint on or if I should just wait, let it dry, and put another coat on top. So this is my meat in the middle. It's super versatile because, if you notice, and I recommend you practice on bases because this is the way to go. So let's go. I'm going to do a test to see if this brown seems pretty thin. Actually, let me pour out a bunch. Yeah, this brown is really thin. So this might not be the best color to do wet blending with, but if this is the color we got, this is the color we got. Okay, that seemed a little bit thicker. So I think that's one of them. I didn't know, Army Painter didn't say anything about pouring out all that medium. And so my first colors are, sometimes maybe you just, fortunately, feels like you're pouring out half your paint too. But this will get the best out of your paint. So let's put this one up here. And you know what? We're going to grab that other brown, the leather brown, the one I said wouldn't work with our dark flesh. And let's see. Okay. It's actually pretty thick, so it might be okay. And it might be okay for wet blending. You never know. Sometimes you just got to try it. Okay, so for bases, the way I usually do bases, like say I've got this guy and he's sitting on top of this base, okay? Even though this is Forbidden Fortress base. But I usually try to put a ring of darker color around the back of the base and brighter color in the front, and it creates sort of a spotlight effect for the miniature. It's more of a display painting thing, but I like the way it looks, and I think, and it's the one way that sort of helped me learn how to do wet blending, because I started doing bases. I'd paint them brown, like a medium brown, and then I would do a wash in the back and then highlight in the front, and it just took forever. And I thought, what if I just put the browns down dark to light? Then I don't have to do any of that other stuff. And so that's how I started learning. But so we'll take some of this brown. On a base, you're going to need a bunch of paint. So I'm going to lay this down. And the cool thing also about these hobby brushes is they get down in all, they have a tendency to get down in all the cracks and crevices better. I don't feel bad about kind of manhandling the brush because I'm not worried about, ruining a $20 brush. So you can see this is lighter in the front, or thinner in the front, thicker in the back. Let's grab this other color. We'll go the other way. See, that's a lot of paint, but we're going to move it around. And right into that darker paint. Okay. Let's do it on another base. This is one of the bases from the Hell Train. This is one of it's like the freight car or something. I don't know. Took forever to sculpt all that wood, by the way. I did this one. The other one Daniel did. Okay, so on this one, let's go. Let's just see what it looks like with the lighter yellowish color. So on this one, we're going to have a much bigger area with the dark brown. So we might just keep loading our brush, putting it on fairly thick. So when I say thick paint, I don't mean like glob it on. I mean sort of just lay it on. And if you're doing this, what that does is it pushes the paint out of your brush and creates those little troughs. And so that's when you start getting the uneven paint and sort of bubbly. But if you just go back and forth, it tends not to do that. It's really nice. So we'll just keep putting this on like this. Get around some of these things. A little bit up in there. Then we'll grab some of this yellow ochre kind of color. We'll go the other direction. We'll move right back into this wood. And maybe we'll do a little bit up in here. We'll just lay it right on top. And we'll go up here like this. A little bit of that dark brown right in there. That way I can blend into it. So you see me kind of like dancing between my colors. You might want to be a little bit more careful, like not going back and forth as much as I do, because sometimes it's hard to control. I've done this a lot, so it's very easy for me to control how my paint interacts with each other. But there you go. So you might notice on this one and on this one as it's drying that I have pretty good coverage over here and pretty good coverage over here, not as good coverage in the middle. Okay, so that's just paint for you, right? But a lot of people will be like, oh no, that's not good. I messed up on the wet blend. And you didn't mess up on the wet blend. You just need to add another coat. So I'll just coat this board up here. It's all wood, right? Okay, so we got that. Let me get my blow dryer and blow dry these real quick. Right there, just right here. And I will answer questions here in just a second. See, we got one. Gotta love blow dryers. Okay. So the question is, since you want the paint to stay wet for the time you're painting, can a little bit of, to avoid thinning, of medium retarder help? I have found actually that for me, it doesn't work at all. Like so at first when you're painting, and this isn't to say that don't try it. I mean, try it. But just remember that retarder is thinning your paint. So you're losing opacity, you're losing, and also it's gonna take longer to dry, which if you do it correctly, it still dries fairly quickly. You don't want to put too much retarder in, because I did that when I first got drying retarder. I thinned it just like, to skim milk with the retarder. It never dried. Like 3 days later, I just washed the paint off the model. I was so bummed. And the paint, since it never dried, it just kept building up. Thickness, put any more paint on, it just adds more paint to the mix, and that paint just starts swirling around. It's just a big mess. So I find I don't really like it, okay? To be honest, my paint doesn't dry fast enough. When you're starting, your paint will dry too fast. So it just kind of is what it is. You got to get good at going fast. The good news about that is once you start getting it, you're going fast. Like you are base coating really, really quick. And you're getting a base coat that in the same time to just put brown on the base, I've got brown to a lighter brown or brown to a yellowish brown. And that's awesome. So that being said, I wouldn't use a retarder. You could try. Just be careful, don't put too much in it, and just remember that it will affect the way the paint reacts to each other when they hit, all that stuff. So and when you find that you start getting, you're fast enough to get the wet blend going, don't don't worry about the drying retarder, because you're actually going to be like me and wanting it to dry quicker, because I need to move on to the next step, which is like highlighting or glazing or whatever. Okay, so I've got that first. Oops, let's switch the camera back. Oops, wrong one. All right, so we've got this one. So now we've got dark down here, lighter brown up there. I'm going to do the same thing. I'll lay the darker brown on here. And if you notice, that dark brown looks like a thin layer, doesn't it? Even though it's very thick. Because the paint is inherently self-leveling. Unless you have really clumpy paint or something. Which you shouldn't. Ah, no. Wrong color. All right, this one. Up here. I'm running out of paint already, so I'll just grab some more, start where I ended, and move right into the darker brown. And if you notice, I always find an exit strategy. I find a way off. If I'm painting on this, I find a way off of it, so I don't just pick my brush up. If you pick your brush up, the blend stops and it doesn't look that great. So on here, clean my brush off. Let's go the other way. I want this color to be really light, so we'll got right here, boom. You see how I blended over here and then I pulled my brush along the edge right there. I created a dark line on that. So this one, maybe I got to be a little more careful because I'm dealing with two colors that are further apart tone-wise. So let's go this one right here. We'll grab the darker brown, just a little bit of it, put it in there. See, I'm just kind of wiggling my brush. And then I will pull it up around the top like this. So if you kind of think ahead just a little bit, you can get away with doing some dark lining too as you do your base coating, which is great. It doesn't always work. At first, don't worry about that. Just make sure you get the paint on and that it blends. So right here. So you're already seeing way better opacity out here. I can fix some little areas right there, here. Go. Running out of paint. Oops. Grab this. Grab a lot more paint. Notice I kind of went fast with my brush strokes, and then when the colors hit, I slowed it down. That gives me a little bit better right there. And then back here in the very back of the base, I can really load up on that paint. Move it back and forth. And I'm just hitting the back end of the first stroke of brown that I had up here. So back here, it doesn't matter kind of my brush stroke because it's just brown over brown. There we go. Really nice blend between the two colors. All right, so let's see here. Let's say I want to do something a little bit more. So let's go. I really like this Crimson Hand red. It's like a nice burgundy. I always remember with my instructions, this has a lot of goo in it too. This is the way I do it, and part of this is just to show you a way to do something, and then maybe that gives you some ideas. And even if your idea is to do it completely different and it works for you, that's the right way. So just because I did it a certain way doesn't mean you have to do it that way, but it's just you get an idea of like, hey, this actually works. I have a friend who wet blends with super thinned paint. She got it to work. So where I have more problems with that, and I have done it in the past, but I would definitely not base coat a model that way. You know, that would be more like finishing stuff, and you have to really be in control of your paintbrush and your paints to paint with it wetter like that. So let's do, I'm going to do this wing. I'll just do right from the top. So get that paint on kind of thick. I'm also kind of following my zenithal prime, so I see where it starts turning gray on each one of those wings. Maybe that's where I stop. I'll grab some of the blue. Now, if you're having problems blending every single wing, you could do each one individually, because there are like little bones in between each one of these, and so you could do that individually, and it will still look fine. Maybe be a little bit easier for you. So I'm going to put some more blue up here and pull this down into the tentacle a little bit more. Do the same right here. Need a little bit more of my lighter blue. Just kind of pulling that down. See how that works? It doesn't always work this easy. So don't feel bad if like you're like, I tried it and I couldn't get it. All right. Okay, so we got that blend. That looks awesome. All right, let's grab a little bit of red. This is like called a kicker color. It's a color that doesn't belong in here, but it's going to go in anyways. It's too much paint, so I'll wipe my brush off. And I'm just going to roll it down at the bottom side of this wing, maybe on a couple spots. Now remember, this area has the thickest amount of paint. That looks kind of cool, huh? You see where this can start getting crazy. For those of you with maybe a little more artistic than others, can already, hopefully your mind's spinning, going, oh my gosh, the things I could do with this. But that gives you those little extra hints of color. Pretty awesome. All right, let me get. Now, one of the cool things is, so we've kind of practiced putting our paintbrush down, unloading paint, and then pushing. If you push the brush down and move back, it's kind of like an eraser, okay? So, which is weird because it's erasing before the color, but it still works, believe it or not. So if I take just a little bit of this red and I put it right here, see if this will work. And I can kind of start doing my eraser thing right off the model. So that's a wet blend without another color. It's just, it went from opaque to not opaque just based on my brush pressure alone. So the funny thing is, this doesn't work nearly as well on flat surfaces. I'm surprised I even got that to work. Usually it starts getting kind of weird. But see, I start with my paintbrush up like this, and I start pushing, moving back and forth. And sometimes, little circles maybe are better. Maybe up and down is better. Maybe back and forth is better. Maybe fast is better. Slow could be better. I go through all the iterations of that to find what's the best for this paint on this model right now. Because maybe I do the same thing over here and it doesn't work. So it's just one of those things that's really aggravating with paint. But if you understand that, you can make adjustments and make it work for yourself. So let's take a look back at this one. There are still wet areas of paint up here because I put that paint on so stinking thick. The first person I ever saw put thick paint on a model was my best friend John, and he literally put it on so thick, like he didn't even touch the brush. Never touched the model. The paint was like almost dripping off the brush, and he laid that layer of paint, like the brush was here and the paint was touching the model, obviously in a much smaller scale, but you get what I'm saying. And he moved that all around this flat surface. And then when he was done, I could see this bead of paint over the whole thing. And I was horrified because I'm skim milk dude, you know. And about half an hour, the paint was all dry. He had moved on to other models, you know. He just came back to that one. And it was perfectly smooth and perfectly opaque. And he was like, you know what? I don't even dull coat my models because there's so much paint on them. It just, like, my paint touches you, you don't touch it, type of thing, you know? So anyways, there are benefits to putting your paint on a little bit thicker. Now, I'm not putting my paint on that thick on these models because there is details there. But I'm putting it on relatively thicker than you would think you need to put it on. But I'm putting it on in a way that doesn't leave marks, it doesn't leave brush strokes. But what it does leave is a really, really strong, bright color. Perfectly the color out of the bottle, you know, in 1 to 2 coats max. And that is perfect. And it's blended a little bit. So let's take a look at this again. Rock and roll. I'm gonna get this OBS thing down here. All right. So if we were to take, now if we want to make sure that this part up here is very, very opaque, I can come back in and I do a thing called insisting on color. And basically I can take this paint, the exact same color, and on this one, it doesn't matter. I'm not putting it on in a big glop and moving it out. I'm kind of starting with that thin application with the thick paint from the very start. But I'm only putting it in those top raised areas where it was opaque anyways, or it's supposed to be opaque. And what that does is it just makes sure that that's perfectly opaque and perfectly that color. I'm seeing that it's not really changing the color at all. So I think I got a pretty good base coat on, but I usually do this just to make sure. Isn't this better than putting 15 coats of paint on and it finally getting the color you want? And you don't have a blend because you were just focused on getting an opaque color. I can put this over here. All right, not too bad. Okay, we're exactly 1 hour in. Any questions on the meet in the middle technique? And these are just base coats. I haven't detailed or anything. Now, you could be like, one and done. You're like, okay, I noticed that paint's still wet. So you can see why I don't put thinners in, because it would take forever for the paint to actually dry. And if I want to start putting a second coat or start doing wood grain or whatever in here, it's going to be a little bit harder. So that's why I don't do that. Yeah. Doesn't look like we have any questions, but let me just double check. Nope. All right. Okie dokie. Here we go. Oops. All right, there's my dog freaking out. Okay, so now we're gonna do true wet on wet, and let's see here. This one's a little bit different. So where we wanted the paint to get super thin so you could blend it the other way, this one we're putting one coat of paint down and we're painting another coat of paint right on top of it. So let's do our brown. I think brown will work for this. No, let's do purple. Okay, so this purple, like I had said before, is kind of thinner than normal. And let's hope that this pink is much thicker. All right, wow, that really exploded out of there. Explosions. All right, so first thing with this, and I'm gonna have to put it on a couple different models. We are going to put a base coat down. So I'm gonna do this, again, relatively thick, moving my brush around on the model, trying to keep it from having brush strokes. All right, we got that one, and then I will do it on here as well. So on this, we do want to get a base coat on. And here, I'm actually hoping if I put the paint on, it's thick paint, but if I put it on in kind of an even, thin layer, it's still darker down here than it was up there. So the zenithal prime is actually helping me out quite a bit. So notice my brush strokes have changed. It's okay to kind of do the streaky brush stroke. I mean, if you want to practice for meet in the middle, then don't do that. Just, you know, keep the back and forth or little circles or whatever, but it's not completely necessary here. All right. Go in here as well, just in case. I'm also killing time so the other thing can dry. There we go. All right. Okie doke. Oh. Blow dry this. So this is our first layer. Need to get that blow dryer further away from the mic. Get that one. Blow dry the other one. Okay, I think that will work. I think that will work. Now, for all of you who really like thinning your paint, we get to thin our paint. So this paint's already super thin. Like this is not, this has like, I feel like zero coverage power, but we'll thin it a little bit with water. And basically what we're gonna do, this is the hardest form of wet blending. This is true wet on wet. So we're gonna paint the same color right over this one, and then we're going to put the pink color on top of it and blend it in. So part of that again is brush pressure. So our initial base coat will go on, and I'm just going to use, you know, just sort of the back and forth motion, keep that paint fairly thin, and then I'm going to grab some of the pink and I'm going to put it on. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to manipulate my brush and kind of lay the paint on top real lightly. And it's funny, if you try hard enough, you can actually lay one wet color on top of another wet color, and it will be perfectly, it will not blend at all. As soon as you push down into the paint below, it starts blending. So I'll maybe try to do that here in a second, but it's not the easiest thing. So here we go. So again, this is one of those things where you don't want to do a really big area. You just want to do a small area. Got that wet on there. And then we'll put this on. See that right there? And if I push, it starts blending. Push. You can go to the other side maybe. Push it down. Now one of the things that you're going to see is this does like a 50-50 of the two colors. Hopefully, like that. So the reason to use this maybe over a meet in the middle is meet in the middle looks like this. Oh, and I thin that out, but we'll see if it works. Meet in the middle goes like this. So see how much brighter that color is than this color? So the true wet on wet, the colors, you get like half of the color. And why would I use that? Well, maybe these wings, you don't want them to be super bright like this side. You want them to be a little bit more subdued. So if we get this, we'll go like this. Grab some of that lighter color. That seems like a lot. Blend that in. We got to blend in the other side. There we go. Do it again. Do right here. And this is work quick, because if you don't, that first layer of paint's going to dry very, very quickly. All right, so we got that. And we'll do this one. So I'm just paying attention. A good pair of reading glasses is really going to help you here, to kind of, the sides you touch, wherever you touch this paint, it's going to blend in. So like here it's blended too much now. So maybe we go, I want it a little bit brighter. A lot of times I just wipe the paint off on my finger or something, but I can get that. And there. So really bright, more subdued, depending on how you want it. I'll tell you this right now. For me, this is super easy. This is super hard. It is what it is. So both techniques you want to use. Depending on what you want to get out of the model or out of your paint job. But I think both techniques are very viable. So you might be asking yourself, how could I mix some of these together? Some of these techniques. So let's say, let me see how I'm going to do this. So we're going to go super dark down here. Lighter up here. I feel like when I first started this, nothing worked right. And then the more I did it, I feel like I could just make it happen. I could will the paint to blend. I think that just came from lots of experience. But it's definitely one of those things. The more you do this, don't be worried about if it doesn't look good at first. Just keep trying. You know it can work. So got that on there. Let's take a little bit of this pink and we'll do true wet on wet right on top of that dark blue. Maybe add a little bit more. And then blend the sides. Get that little hint of color coming in. And if I'm like, well, you know what, that looks horrible. So this is a really good way to change things up a bit on the fly. Now, obviously, you can't keep adding paint here, but I can add a little bit of paint. If I do it real lightly and then push down. So now our color is going from light blue to a tealy, darker blue to purple. And then maybe after the purple, that's when this should be here. So you see I laid it in there real light. I'm going to wipe my brush off. Make sure there's no water in it. And just touch the outside edges of this. So I laid that pink in there really light. So it actually covers, like almost perfectly covers. Now, when this dries, it's going to get a little bit darker, which is okay. You see up here, all that color got darker. So now you see the real ramifications of this is me in the middle. This is true wet on wet. But we can also go, hey, maybe I grab a little of this pink, put it right up here, and we do that trick where you just let it run out. So we're kind of insisting on color. Lay it there real lightly. The lighter I lay it down on there, like the more paint kind of comes off of my brush. If I push hard, it squeezes the paint flat. So maybe I just put some dots kind of coming down. I could do that over here as well. There you go. All right. Wow, that was really fast. Any questions? Any answers? Anything? All right. So now I'll just keep showing you tricks. So we've got the meat in the middle, which is this one. So you get really bright contrast. We've got true wet on wet. Are there any two colors where you never even try to blend? I don't know. Not really. So here's the deal. When you're blending colors, like blending the purple and the purple together, or the pink and the purple together, I get this weird shade of pinkish purple, right? What if I need more stuff. Okay, let's say I blend this dark brown with the pink. Because why not, right? For some reason it's pink floors. I'm gonna sale at Home Depot. So this color blending into the brown, maybe not so bad. But if we take it on our palette, or just blend those colors on our palette, we get kind of that color, which isn't horrible either. Actually, that's a good flush tone. What do you know? But you see here, we get a lot of little micro blends and stuff. And it might be a little bit squiggly to you, but that's okay. Look at this. If I just carefully blend that side, now that edge is blended in, pretty good. So when you blend a color on your palette, it will look different than when you blend a color on your model. Just kind of the way it works. So let me see. A lot of colors I shy away from are like oranges. Let's try it. I mean, There's times where you just got to use orange, but oh, it actually looks pretty thick. Let's do the yellow. Yellow I shy away from because I'll just airbrush it. Got that. So let's try orange. Let's do it in the... Oh, that's not Caverns of Cinder. Is this Caverns of Cinder? Actually, this is Targa Plateau. Let's pretend like it's Caverns of Cinder. Okay? What the heck, right? So this color is going to be on the outside looking in. And then we'll go yellow the other way. So these are going to be two notoriously hard colors. Not too bad. You never know. This may be my best performance ever. Wow. I'm surprised. I'm shocked. Actually worked pretty good. Now, granted, this is working pretty good in a small area. So once we get out of that small area and start going to large areas, it may not work nearly as well. So that's the other thing. Sometimes you just realize when the wet blending will work really good and when it won't. And that comes with time and practice. You just gotta, you know, it's not that like, oh, this paint sucks now. It's just, it just didn't work for that technique that you were doing. All right, get that right there. See how like I'm not afraid to just jam the, like smash the paint in between those cracks and stuff. If I've got my Raphael out here, that's a $22 brush now. Like I'm not doing that to my Raphael. So another reason why these hobby brushes are gold. But I guarantee you the Raphael would not put the paint on as even as this brush. So, all right. You know what? I take it back. These orange works great. So, too much paint, I'll wipe it off. A bit more there. A little bit more yellow over here. Not bad. It's always when I'm teaching, when I'm trying to show that it works, it never works, and then when I try to show that, like in this case, it's not going to work, it works. So there you go. I mean, I think that's pretty good. That's a pretty good base coat for that. Now it's not to my standards. I would want to put more coats of the orange on and yellow, just to make sure this is really, really vibranty lava. And at the end of the day, probably put some little details in within the lava so that it looks super cool. But for now, see this? I'm just insisting on that orange color out on the outer edges. So it's very, very orange. One thing when you're, this isn't an OSL class, but when you're doing OSL or any kind of lighting effects, typically you do not want any desaturated colors in your light source, basically. So lava is a little bit different because there can be some dark areas in lava, but technically if you want it really bright and vibrant, don't have any shadows. So I'm trying to obliterate any of the shadows out on the outer edge of this base. You could also do that by painting the base completely white to begin with, but I like having the zenithal prime because I think it makes things more dynamic. So sometimes you just gotta cover up the zenithal prime. So we've got that. Let's see if we could do something else. I'm gonna add a little bit of black to my palette. Maybe. If your bottle, oh my gosh, I just put my hand in the paint. If your bottle clogs, I just take the lid off and pour the paint out of the lid and then put it back on. And that way I have a perfectly sealed bottle. Also, when you get the clog out, like usually people do a little pokey tool or something to fix that, it just reclogs 5 minutes later. So it's not worth the aggravation. Let's do some of this bone color, I think. All right. Okay. So we're going to do black with some of this teal. This is where we start playing with colors. Now with this, maybe I need to use a better brush, but we'll just see if we can pull it off. We'll paint a couple of these bases. I'm using the blue, the tentacle blue in there because it adds, it cools off my black. Also makes it not black anymore. But also it's cool against the warm of the fiery base. So it gives me nice contrast. You can use little tricks like that. If everything in your scene is warm, it starts getting a little bit boring, or it's harder to have those contrasts. But if I do this, I get a double contrast. We've got dark against very bright, it's desaturated against saturated, and it's cool against warm. So you've hit 3 different contrasts with one color. That's awesome. Triple dipping. It's like Dippin' Dots.
Triple dipple.
Except not. All right. Okay. So we'll do those. We'll do one more. Or 2 more. I'm actually just waiting for those first ones to dry. So if I was doing a whole bunch of these bases, I probably would have just airbrushed the orange to yellow blend on all of them really fast. But if you're just doing one, you can very easily just do it this way and still get a pretty vibrant colors. Yeah. Okay, so we got that. Oops. All right. We'll do add a little bit of water to our thin down color or our darker color. Actually, I want to see. Just do this up there. So I want to go a little bit lighter than I think I really want it to be. So we'll put this on here. And that right on top of it. So thinned out paint down. Grab some of that lighter color, and I'm trying to put it kind of in the middle, maybe. Maybe that won't work. And just touch the outside edges of it. If you're doing if you've ever done oil painting, this is very, very similar to that. Oops. Our base color. On this one, we've got letters, so let's See if we can't just lay this right on top without going inside the letters. Watch this. I didn't even put the other color down. I'm just using whatever's left on my brush to kind of layer in on top there. Come back. Let me do a couple sort of stippled layers on the tops of these rocks right here. See how that's like building up the color, but very subtly. So we have very dynamic, very subtle. Let's clean off my brush. I'm gonna grab, there's like a hair. You know what, I don't know why I'm dealing with that old hobby brush when I could just grab a good brush. So let's do this. You see I flattened the back of my brush off? So that is sort of giving me a little blend right there. Let's put the tip of the brush into the paint. Same thing over here. Let me try it again. Now you might find that your brush leaves like some weird brush strokes, and maybe those are cool. So here's an example. If we take, so we'll do this, purple, pink, roll my brush around. So see, it started blending at the start of this brush stroke, and then I kind of got some other areas where maybe I can do true wet on wet. Start creating a little bit of a texture. Maybe we can come back with the purple. Move through the other color. So it's pretty subtle, but this can be the start of a really cool texture that's within this piece, you know? So for whatever reason, like say on these wings, you want it to be kind of blotchy, or like if I'm doing leather or these wood strips right here, can go. That's really bad brown. Let's get some of the good stuff out. So yeah, one thing to look for, if your paint's kind of see-through coming out of the bottle, not a good wet blending. Something like that. And then this one. Maybe we just kind of streak it. Okay, let that dry, and then we can always finish the wood grain with more deliberate brush strokes. That looks kind of cool. Go this up here. Here's the great thing about painting with your paint thicker, is it definitely covers much better. So nice thick coat of paint there. And we'll go like this. There. This. So there's a little bit of the pink still showing through, but that's easy to fix with subsequent layers. You may find certain colors will just cover it perfectly, you know, so it is what it is. But that is using some wet blending and just kind of haphazardly pulling my brush through. And making a pre-texture texture. All right. Any questions on that? Are there any two colors? Oh, wait. Is wet blending a technique you can use to do OSL? Technically, yes, you could. It's way easier to do with a paint or with an airbrush, though. So, like, if I don't have a model that's actually glowing. So let's say our little runes here are supposed to be glowing. So we got pink out. And, here's some white. Let's see if this works. It's not going to be as easy. You might actually, it might actually work better with almost dry brushing, you know. I don't know if you're familiar with Cool Mini or not. They're probably the largest gallery of painted miniatures, and people could vote on them, you know, what's cooler and what's not. The model that was #1 for a long time, I don't know if it's still #1, but it was by a painter named Victoria Lamb from Australia. She did amazing OSL. She was one of the first people doing OSL. It's funny because all of that OSL, she's like, yeah, I dry brushed it all. Which is really funny because back in the day, a lot of the little grommets and stuff on Cool Mini or not, like if you dry brush, they would just wreck you. But they obviously couldn't tell that she had dry brushed it, but she obviously did a better job than most. So let's see if we can't make these look like they're glowing, kind of. This is going to be really hard because it's really small. Now, if I use my airbrush, it would be like 5 seconds, and we've got a glow, and then we could just sort of adjust it a little bit and make it super cool. But we don't. All right, so we'll grab some pink. Just gonna lay it like right in those spots. Don't really want it on the top side. Woo! This may not work. This is really tiny. All right, so this may be your reason not to do this for OSL. That, we'll grab a little bit of pink, go the opposite direction. You almost can't tell. This is pretty on the small side. But you would definitely have to go this side right here. The trick is on this is I can't use very much paint. Oh, crud. Okay, and then the last little part right here. What a pain. Then pink, white, maybe just a touch of yellow. So the yellow, so it shows up better. I don't know. It's not the greatest OSL in the world, but it'll work for now. The funny thing is, actually, on these rocks, I don't know how much of the OSL would actually be leaking out onto the rock itself because these are set into the rock. But it does look cool if a little bit of it comes out. So this one was without any OSL coming off of it, and this one is with the OSL. So you can do it. It's definitely 1,000 times easier with an airbrush for sure, because the OSL has to go in certain directions. So like the light, if it's hitting my face, the OSL would be on this side of my nose, but not on this side of my nose. It'd be on, like, depending on where the light is, if it's back here, it's hitting my cheek, but it's not hitting the front part of my cheek. So with your airbrush, you can actually angle the airbrush to come in and hit. It hits just like light. Obviously not all the spots. You have to come back in with your paintbrush and fix some things, but it's definitely a lot easier with the airbrush for sure. Or a combination of airbrush and paintbrush. You can't do it all with airbrush alone. You technically could do it all with the paintbrush, but you're also spending way more time doing that. So, like if you look at the HUD right here, this picture right here, on the face, all that lighting is hitting in a particular direction, and then when the light can't hit it anymore, it goes back to being what it was. But also notice they make it darker right next to where the light is, so the light looks brighter. So it's just one of those things. Okay, so it's 11:41, and do we have any other questions? All right, I'll show you one more quick technique. This is my buddy Ben Comets. He didn't make up this technique; he just perfected it. And he had a bunch of fans online and stuff. He was doing video tutorials, and when they would try to explain it, it was too many words. It was just like it was just too much. So some of his fans coined the term loaded brush, and so that's what this one's called. It's a very good technique. Technically, you can learn this technique at your local Michael's or Hobby Lobby. It's probably taught by a little lady painting flowers. So same type of thing. Okay, so technically what we're doing here is we're putting two colors in the brush and blending them together. So in this case, let's do the blue. Let's see if this works. I'm going to do white. And this white is super grainy. I love it. So let's see if I can't mush it into like paint paste. I don't know if it's supposed to be like that, but mine's like that. Okay. So that looks a little bit more like paint. Thank goodness. All right. Okay, so the key here is you're going to pick up your first color and then pick up your second color and then paint. So the first color needs to be a little bit thinned. So I'm just going to add, that's why I don't make my wet palette super big. So if we pull this back, so I can just touch and grab just a little bit of water instead of a lot of water. Because if you put it in your water cup, it usually tends to grab tons of water. So I'm going to load this brush up a little bit. I don't want tons of paint, but I want just enough paint to start blending the next color. Okay, so I've got that. And then I'm going to grab a little bit on the tip of the brush. And a lot of times you can tell when people are painting with loaded brush. So a lot of times they will lay their brush down on their finger and start the blend a little bit, and then they'll put it on their model. So we'll go right here, say right there. And then again, the more pressure you put on this brush, the more it blends. So that made kind of a really bright highlight up there. I can grab a little bit more white. And I can do the other side. Do something like that. So this is a really good technique. A lot of times I did it with my base coating brush, but a lot of times I will do it with my regular brush. And we get, say, I want a little bit more pink going here. Do pink with a little bit of white. And wipe off my brush, come back in and just feather out the edge. That's kind of cool, eh? Right? So you see, painting's not about knowing just one technique and going with it. It's learning several, and that actually helps you with everything. Like I said before, sometimes I'm painting along on a model and I've been using meet in the middle, meet in the middle, meet in the middle, and then meet in the middle doesn't work for some reason. Certain part of the model, you know, for whatever reason, it just didn't work. So I got to switch it up. So maybe I try loaded brush, or I try true wet on wet, or I have to layer. See how that's starting to give me a pretty cool result. I can re-up with a little bit more of my pink. Look at that. Sort of did a highlight around the top of right next to that horn, and worked pretty good. Let's go. We'll load up with purple. I really hope this works. Pink. So now we'll do pink stripe that blends down into purple. But it's very small, just a little detail. Try one up here. The harder I push, there we go, perfect. So I can make some of these little highlight lines blend from one color to another. Push down a little bit harder, maybe come back in. You notice I just really quickly wiped my brush off, try to get some of that paint off, and then came back in and just sort of massaged the edges of that paint down. And you'll find very quickly, you know, how much paint you can actually put on before it kind of overpowers. So, you know, I only want that pink to go like halfway down. So maybe at the halfway point, wipe my brush off and then continue that stroke. But now it's mostly purple. And I can do, if we try purple with a little bit of pink. I've actually never done this before, so we'll see what happens. A little bit of white. And maybe it's an okay result. Maybe. Go like this. There you go. Then if you want to do sort of some finishing moves with this, since we've got 10 minutes left, I have the notion that loader brush is the most difficult technique, so I have been scared to engage with it. Yeah, it worked okay for me right there. I have never gotten it to work the way Ben Comets gets it to work. Like, his is magic. And it's just insane to me how he's able to control his paint, but he does. But I've gotten it to work in other ways, you know. So like when I'm doing the meat in the middle, sometimes I'll just dab into another color and do my kicker color with that. You know, so I do it in different ways. But if you get to this point and you're like, okay, now I just want to sort of finish this up, make my blends a little bit smoother. So typically, let's see here. The big blue side. Let's go get that color. Maybe we'll make it in the middle color because we don't really have an in the middle color. And I don't normally do like, it's usually I pick my shadow color and my mid-tone color for the meet in the middle wet blend when I'm wet blending. Because I can always put highlights on it and stuff, but it gives me a good idea of the mid-tone to highlight. In this case, we kind of did highlight to shadow, so we don't have a mid-tone. So I'm gonna make sort of a mid-tone-y color here. It's this color right here. I just mixed the two together. Maybe I want to go a little bit darker. Oops. A little bit darker. And then we're gonna thin this out quite a bit. Something like this. See, it's very see-through. It's fairly dark color, but fairly see-through. I always wipe it off, and we can take this and so I try not to do any one particular brush stroke. It's always like sort of haphazard, not even, non-linear brush strokes. Because what I'm trying to create is like a little filter of colors here. And that will cover up any bad blends that I have. But maybe I don't want to cover them up completely. There's a fine line between leaving some of those bad blends, some of the brush strokes, and getting rid of some of the brush strokes, or just hiding them a little bit. I like having a little bit of brush stroke in my work because it gives it a more texture and it's more real, I think. But if it's too smooth or too choppy, it's bad. So put some up in here, put some over here. We can also take our highlight color and thin it out like crazy. Now, one thing you'll find, a lot of people ask me, oh, I've got really chalky paints. Well, guess what? You'll never have chalky paint if your paint's thick. This paint, not chalky. This paint, not chalky. It's not the greatest blend up here, but it's not chalky either. The reason paint gets chalky is because it is over-thinned. So what does the internet tell you to do when your paint's over-thinned? Thin it some more, which is completely the wrong thing to do. So if we put this thinned out highlight color in here, but I'm only putting it in the area where there was highlight previously. And what that does is when it dries and it's chalky, you can't see it. Because the chalkiness is just the pigments showing through. Because it's so thinned out, they're not close enough together to actually make a solid color, so they just look chalky, and that's bad. So you want to keep this color up in your highlights basically, but also you notice I'm kind of not doing like a brush stroke like this. I'm doing like little things, like not straight lines, because if any of these show up, you'll never know, because it just looks like all the rest of the textured painting. But what it does do is it starts covering the edges. It starts blurring those lines where there's brush strokes. Like right here is a brush stroke. So technically, I should just paint it lighter. That's what I'm gonna do. The light blue. We'll go. That was where my two brush or my loaded brush or something didn't quite go across right. So we'll get these little, pull out those highlights. Pretty cool. We can do some more of our sort of mid-tone glaze. Maybe pull it up through some of these bigger ridges and stuff. Now this isn't leaving a whole lot of color, you know, especially once it dries, you almost can't see it. But what I want is it to just sort of tint my colors and also make it look less painted. It's funny, we're painting these models and trying to make them look not painted, but you just want it to look real. Now, obviously, for your gaming stuff, maybe you're not going to go to this extent. But if you want to take it to a higher level, you're entering your models in painting contests and stuff, you're definitely going to want to get more refined. And there's a big war between smooth and not smooth. But I'll tell you this right now, the guys who are painting textured and winning contests, their paint is really well defined. It is textured yet still very smooth. So just kind of maybe doing some streaks like that. These are all with glazes, so it's like nothing is covering up too much. Sometimes I over highlight a little bit and then knock it back down. So maybe like in something like over here, you can get the idea on these wings. I can bring in that mid-tone glaze. And it covers up the highlight, but it doesn't get rid of it completely. So maybe you want to tone those wings down. Now you could do this on, I mean, there's nothing stopping you from doing this on a gaming piece, because if you just do it quickly and don't worry about being perfect, you might actually find that you learn a lot about glazing and how to do it properly and fast and all that stuff. So I encourage you to just try it. Otherwise, you know what? You could wet blend a model and not do anything else to it, and I think it would be fine. And all your friends will be jealous and be like, hey, how did you paint so good? How are you getting those blends? And you will not tell them a thing. You won't tell them about me or anybody who can paint. So keep it our little secret. Just kidding. Tell them everything. And show them the Shadows Brimstone website, or send them over to Miniature Monthly. We'll teach them. It all works out. You can take some little highlight color, maybe come back in and just do little bitty final highlight type things on here. Obviously, it's something you can go back and forth on, but you kind of get the idea. Like that. Maybe we do some little bitty final highlights up on here after we glazed it down again. That'll give us some contrast. Maybe it looks a little bit shiny on these bones. There you go. All right, we've got 1 minute. Any questions? If we do have ones, I will answer them. But you know what? Actually, our friend Marianne Osborne, which I don't know if she's here or not. Let's see here. I need to find. Oh my gosh, this might be hard. This might be hard to find. Holy moly. Being Adventures. Which Kickstarter was the tank in? I know that's like a loaded question.
Adventures.
I have adventure folders for days.
You can always post it in the Facebook group.
I don't know where it is. I'm sorry, Marianne. But if I find it, I will post it in Showers of Brimstone group. Anyways, it was the Tridarian Scout tank that I did. Anyways, thank you guys for coming out, for asking questions, for trying, for painting. And the big thing is just practice. Just do it. Just do it. Just do it. All right. Okay. I will talk to you guys later. Thank you guys for coming, and go play a couple of games, online games. The frogs are crazy, and they make all these cool things, and they do all this cool stuff for you guys, and you need to take opportunity and do it because it's super rad. And this is your one opportunity to play on some of those tables virtually. That really we only ever see at Dice Fest. I've never even played on those tables, but I have seen them live. They're freaking cool. So if you get a chance to fly over from England or Africa or Asia or wherever you're coming from and go to Dice Fest, it's worth it. I think it's totally worth it. And the root beer is delicious. And they have sugar-free root beer. So that's even more delicious. So there you have it. So yeah, go to the actual Dice Fest if you can. If you can, like, if it's like a bucket list for once in your life, go to it. If you just want to learn how to paint miniatures, you can find me on Miniature Monthly Patreon page. So just go to Patreon, look up Miniature Monthly. We have a lot of good videos by 3 different artists. So there's different vibes for different types of people. We also have private coaching that I do. Matt DiPietro does private coaching as well. Super fun. Love to hang out and talk with you guys some more. And I love me too, Chris White. I'm really glad you're here. And notice I didn't ask anybody to tell me what colors to use because Chris always gives me the hardest colors to do on something. So, we would have done a white Hellbat and it would have not been nearly as exciting as our blue Hellbat and purple Hellbat. So anyways, I want to see some people on the Facebook page painting up some of those Hellbat sets that are like from different worlds, and I want them to look like they're from the different worlds, like sculpt the bases, do all that stuff. That's your challenge today, and you need to do it today and post it today. No, I'm just kidding. But maybe in the next week and a half, 2 weeks, paint up some Hellbats for me and post them. I've got the lava bats, which I'm working on, and I've got regular Hellbats from Dragano. But I need more. I need the ones from the Belly of the Beast. I forget what they're called, but I'm working on changing the faces because I think they need to look more sphincterish, which is a copyrighted frog term for sphincter-ish. So anyways, thank you guys all for coming. I'm going to go before I get kicked out, and I will talk to you guys later, okay? Have a good one. I'm going to stop recording.